The storekeeper's voice cut through the winter air like a blade. "No more credit, Mrs. Hayes, not another dime." Nora's hands trembled as she set down the flour sack, her son's hollow cheeks flashing in her mind. Behind her, whispers spread like wildfire. Widow broke shameful. She turned to leave, chin-up tears burning behind her eyes. That's when she heard boots on frozen ground and a voice like gravel and honey. "Ride with me. I'll fill your table tonight." The stranger's storm-blue eyes held no pity, only a promise that terrified and tempted her in equal measure. Before we begin, if you love stories of second chances and the courage to hope again, please subscribe to our channel. Stay with us until the very end and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's begin. The bell above Garrett's general store rang with false cheerfulness as Nora Hayes pushed through the door, her worn shawl pulled tight against the January wind. She'd waited until mid-afternoon, hoping the usual crowd would thin. But Wyoming winters drove everyone indoors, and today the store buzzed with ranchers' wives examining fabric cowboys, buying tobacco, and old men warming themselves by the potbelly stove. Nora kept her eyes down, moving quickly toward the back where Mr. Garrett kept the staples. Her list was short: flour, cornmeal, maybe salt if she could manage it. Her fingers tightened around the coins in her pocket, not nearly enough, but she'd been adding to Garrett's ledger for 3 months now. Surely he'd extend her just a little more time. "Mrs. Hayes." Garrett's voice boomed across the store before she'd reached the counter. "Need to speak with you." The conversations around them didn't stop, but they quieted. Nora felt every eye shift toward her as she approached the counter where Garrett stood, his thick arms crossed over his apron. "I have a list," she said, sliding the paper across the scarred wood. "Just the essentials." Garrett didn't look at it. "Can't do it." "I'm sorry." "Your account's closed, Mrs. Hayes. 3 months past due. Can't carry you any longer." The blood drained from Nora's face. "Mr. Garrett, please. My boy." "Should have thought of that before." His voice carried to every corner of the store now. "I run a business, not a charity. You want goods, you pay cash." Nora's throat constricted. Behind her, someone whispered. She caught the words "poor thing," and what did she expect in the same breath? Her hands shook as she pulled out the coins, 17 cents, that had taken her 2 weeks to earn doing mending. "This is all I have right now, but the pension—" "There is no pension." Garrett's tone turned almost pitying, which somehow made it worse. "Your husband wasn't regular Army, Mrs. Hayes. He was territorial militia. No widow benefits. Everyone knows that." She hadn't known that. Tom had told her. But Tom had told her a lot of things. She swayed slightly, gripping the counter's edge. "I can work," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can clean or—" "Got no work for you." Garrett shook his head. "Try the church. Reverend Michaels handles charity cases." Charity cases. The words hit her like a slap. Around her, the store had gone completely silent. Every person there would tell this story tonight over supper, how the Hayes widow had come begging, how she'd been turned away, how she'd fallen so far. "Please." The word escaped before she could stop it. "My son hasn't eaten since yesterday morning." Garrett's expression hardened. "That's what happens when folks live beyond their means. You got that big homestead sitting empty, maybe you should consider selling it. Move somewhere you can afford." The homestead. The 40 acres Tom had promised would be their future. Now it was just another weight around her neck, too small to farm profitably, too remote to attract buyers, too full of ghosts to feel like home. Nora picked up her coins with numb fingers. The 17 cents felt heavy as stones in her palm. She turned toward the door, and the crowd parted for her like she carried plague. "Such a shame," Mrs. Thornton murmured to her companion loud enough to carry. "Pretty woman like that. If she'd just been more practical, she might have found another husband by now." Pride, someone else muttered. That's what keeps her out there alone. Too proud to accept help. Nora's vision blurred. She pushed through the door into the brittle, cold, gulping air that burned her lungs. The afternoon sun slanted low across Sheridan's main street, turning the snow to diamonds. It was beautiful and utterly indifferent to her humiliation. She made it 3 steps before her knees buckled. She caught herself against a hitching post, pressing her forehead to the frozen wood. 6 miles back to the homestead. 6 miles to tell Eli she'd failed. 6 miles to look into her 9-year-old son's trusting face and admit she couldn't feed him. "Ma'am?" The voice came from behind her, low, careful, like someone approaching a spooked horse. Nora stiffened, but didn't turn. "Ma'am, you dropped something." She looked down. Nothing. Her hands were empty except for those useless coins. When she finally turned, she found herself looking up at a man she'd never seen before. He was tall, lean in the way of men who'd spent years in the saddle. His coat was worn but clean, his hat pulled low over eyes that were the color of storm clouds over the mountains. A cowboy, she thought. Or a drifter. Something about him suggested long roads and few routes. "I didn't drop anything," she said. "My mistake." He studied her with an intensity that should have felt intrusive, but somehow didn't. "Heard what happened in there? Garrett's a bastard, pardon my language." "It's fine, he's right. I owe him money." "Being right doesn't make him less of a bastard." The stranger glanced past her toward the store, then back. "Got a boy, you said?" Nora's instinct was to lie to protect what little she had left. But something in this man's weathered face, some deep exhaustion that matched her own, made her nod. "Eli. He's 9. And you're headed home to him with nothing." "I'll figure something out." The lie tasted bitter. "I always do." The stranger was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his words came slow measured, like he'd weighed each one. "I got a wagon, got some supplies, and I got no particular place to be." He paused. "Ride with me. I'll fill your table tonight." Nora's breath caught. "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask you to." "I don't even know you." "Name's Colt Mercer. There. Now you know me." "That's not what I—" She stopped fighting the tears that threatened to spill over. "Why would you help me? You don't know anything about me." Colt looked down the street toward the mountains rising purple in the distance. "When I was about your boy's age, I went 3 days without eating. Man found me stealing eggs from his henhouse. Should have shot me, would have been within his rights. Instead, he fed me. Never asked my name, never asked for payment. Just fed me and sent me on my way." He met her eyes again. "Been looking to pay that debt forward ever since." "I'm not a charity case." Even as she said it, she knew how hollow it sounded. "No, ma'am. You're a mother trying to feed her child. That's the oldest, most honest work there is." Colt gestured toward a wagon hitched outside the saloon. "I'm heading north in a few days. But today I got time. And you got need. Seems simple to me." Everything in Nora screamed that this was wrong. You didn't accept rides from strange men. You didn't let strangers into your life. You didn't take charity from cowboys with sad eyes and easy promises. But Eli's face rose in her mind, his 2 thin arms, the way he never complained even when his stomach must have been gnawing itself hollow, the trust in his eyes when he asked if there would be breakfast tomorrow. "Just food," she asked quietly. "Just food. I'll load it up, you can direct me to your place. I'll unload it and be on my way. You'll never see me again if you don't want to." The last part felt like a lie, even as he said it, but Nora was too desperate to care. She thought of walking those 6 miles in the cold, of arriving home empty-handed again, of watching Eli try not to cry when she told him to go to bed hungry. "Okay," she whispered. Colt's expression didn't change, no triumph, no satisfaction. He simply nodded and touched the brim of his hat. "Wait here." He disappeared into the store, and Nora stood frozen by the hitching post, wondering if she'd just made the worst decision of her life. 5 minutes later, he emerged carrying 2 crates stacked high with goods. Behind him, Mr. Garrett stood in the doorway, his face purple with confusion and something that might have been shame. Colt loaded the crates into the wagon with easy efficiency, then returned to help Nora up to the bench. His hand was calloused and warm, and he released her the moment she was seated. No lingering touch, no presumption. As they pulled away from the store, Nora saw Mrs. Thornton and her friends clustered in the window watching with open mouths. Let them talk. They'd talk anyway. At least tonight, Eli would eat. The wagon creaked along the frozen road heading west toward the mountains. Colt didn't speak, didn't press her for conversation. Nora was grateful. She didn't trust her voice not to break. After 20 minutes, he cleared his throat. How long since your husband passed? 8 months. I'm sorry. Don't be. It wasn't. She stopped appalled at herself. She'd never said it out loud, never admitted even to herself that Tom's death had brought more relief than grief. He drank, gambled. We had money when he was alive, but it went through his hands like water. And he didn't provide for you after. He provided promises. The bitterness in her voice surprised her. He said the militia pension would take care of us. Said he'd made arrangements. Turned out that was just another story. Colt nodded slowly. Some men are good at stories. Are you? He glanced at her, and for the first time she saw something like humor in his eyes. Terrible at them. Why I don't talk much. Despite everything, Nora almost smiled. They rode in silence for another mile before she spoke again. Why are you really doing this? Told you. Paying forward? No. She turned to face him. That's a reason, but it's not the whole truth. You saw what happened in that store. You heard Garrett humiliate me. And instead of walking away like everyone else, you followed me out. Why? Colt was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something she couldn't name. Because I've been hungry. And I've been alone. And I've stood where you stood, knowing the world sees you as disposable. He kept his eyes on the road. And because nobody should have to beg for the right to feed their child. The simple honesty of it broke something open in Nora's chest. She turned away, pressing her hand to her mouth as tears finally spilled over. Colt said nothing, just guided the wagon steadily westward, while she wept silent tears for her pride, her fear, and the small mercy of a stranger who'd seen her shame and chosen kindness instead. When she'd regained control, she wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Thank you, she said quietly, for the food, and for seeing me. Yes, ma'am. They turned off the main road onto a narrower track that wound through sparse pine forest. The homestead appeared as they crested a small rise, a cabin with sagging corners, a barn that leaned precariously, fences that had surrendered to snow and time. Smoke rose thin from the chimney, which meant Eli had managed to keep the fire going. As they pulled up to the cabin, the door flew open, and Eli burst out his too large coat, flapping around him. He stopped short when he saw the stranger wariness flooding his thin face. Eli, it's all right. Nora climbed down from the wagon, moving to her son. This is Mr. Mercer. He's brought us some supplies. Supplies. Eli's eyes went to the crates, and naked hope flashed across his face before he remembered to be cautious. Did you get work, Ma? No, honey. Mr. Mercer is just being kind. Eli looked at Colt with the old soul suspicion of a child who'd learned too young that kindness usually came with strings. Why, Eli? Nora gasped, but Colt was already climbing down from the wagon. Fair question. He studied the boy. Your ma needed help. I could give it, that's all. For free. For free. Nobody does nothing for free. Eli, that's enough. He's right to ask. Colt pulled the first crate from the wagon and set it on the ground. World teaches boys like him not to trust easy gifts, Smart of him. He looked at Eli directly. I won't lie to you, son. I don't know you or your ma, but I know hungry, and I know winter, and I know what it's like to need help you're too proud to ask for. So yes, this is free. No strings, no debts. Just one person helping another because they can. Eli studied him for a long moment, then looked to his mother. Nora nodded, and something in the boy's shoulders loosened. Thank you, sir. Help me unload. They worked together, the three of them, carrying crates and sacks into the cabin. Nora's home was sparse. A single room with a loft, a cast-iron stove that radiated meager heat, a table and 2 chairs that Tom had built in one of his rare sober moments. But it was clean. She'd made sure of that. Poverty didn't have to mean filth. As Colt set down the last sack, Nora inventoried what he'd brought: flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, coffee sugar, even a small bag of peppermint sticks that made Eli's eyes go wide. It was more food than they'd seen in months. This is too much, she said. This must have had pelts to trade. Colt dusted off his hands. Was planning to stock up for a trip anyway. This just redirected things. I'll pay you back. Somehow. I don't know how yet, but I will. No need. He looked around the cabin, and she saw him note the water stain on the ceiling, the gaps in the log, chinking that let in drafts, the window covered with oiled paper instead of glass. You need anything else before I go? Everything, she thought. I need everything. But she'd taken enough. No, this is more than enough. Thank you. Colt nodded and headed for the door, but Eli's voice stopped him. Mr. Mercer, do you got a place to stay? Eli. Nora's face flushed hot. I got a bedroll. Colt's expression remained carefully neutral. I'll be fine. There's a storm coming. Eli pointed toward the northwest where dark clouds were massing over the mountains. Big one. Pa used to say when the clouds looked like that, you didn't want to be caught outside. Colt followed the boy's gaze, and Nora saw his jaw tighten. I've weathered worse. The barn, Nora heard herself say. It's not much, but it's shelter. If the storm's as bad as Eli thinks, you'd be welcome to wait it out there. She didn't know what made her offer. Maybe the memory of Colt's words. I've been hungry. I've been alone. Maybe the simple decency of a stranger who'd helped without asking for her story or her shame. Maybe just the desperate human need not to be quite so alone. Colt studied her face, and she had the unsettling sense he could see every thought spiraling through her mind. Just until the storm passes. Just until then. Then I'm obliged. The storm hit 2 hours later with the fury of something that had been saving itself for exactly this moment. Wind screamed through the gaps in the cabin walls, driving snow horizontal across the yard. Nora fed Eli hot cornmeal with sugar, the first real meal he'd had in days, and watched him eat with the single-minded focus of a starving child trying not to gobble. Slowly, she murmured. Your stomach needs to remember how to hold food. Through the window she could see Colt moving around the barn, securing doors and checking the structure. He moved with the easy competence of a man who'd spent his life solving problems with his hands. When he disappeared inside, Nora felt an odd pang of guilt. The barn was barely standing. It would be freezing in there. Ma? Eli had finished his meal and was watching her with those 2 knowing eyes. Is he gonna leave when the storm stops? I imagine so, honey. He said he was heading north. But he could stay, if we asked. Eli, we can't. Why not? He's nice, and he helped us, and... The boy's voice dropped to a whisper. I don't like it being just us, Ma. I get scared at night. Nora pulled him close, pressing her face into his hair. I know, baby. I know. But we can't ask strangers to stay just because we're lonely. He don't feel like a stranger. She didn't have an answer for that. Because Eli was right. There was something about Colt Mercer that didn't feel strange at all. It felt like recognition. like meeting someone who spoke a language she'd thought only she understood. That night she lay awake listening to the storm rage and wondering about the man in her barn. Wondering if he was warm enough, if he had enough blankets, if he'd stay past the storm or disappear with the morning light, leaving them with food and the memory of unexpected kindness. She didn't know then that Colt Mercer wouldn't leave with the storm, that he'd see her leaking roof and her broken fences and her desperate, exhausted eyes, and he'd make a decision that would change both their lives forever. She didn't know that the day she was denied in Garrett's store would become the day everything started to rebuild. But she'd learn. They both would. The storm blew itself out by dawn, leaving the world buried in white silence. Nora woke to the sound of splitting wood, steady rhythmic cracks that pulled her from uneasy dreams. She dressed quickly in the freezing air, wrapping her shawl tight before stepping outside. Colt stood by the woodpile, his breath fogging in the sharp morning light. He'd already split enough wood to fill the porch, and he showed no signs of stopping. His coat hung on a fence post despite the cold, and sweat darkened the back of his shirt. "Mr. Mercer." Nora's voice came out rougher than she intended. "You don't have to do that." He sunk the axe into the chopping block and straightened, rolling his shoulders. "Storm's past. Road'll be clear by afternoon. Then you should rest. Have some breakfast before you go." "Rather work." He pulled the axe free and positioned another log. "Noticed your woodpile's low. Winter's got another month in her at least." "I can manage." "Not saying you can't." The axe fell, splitting the log clean. "But if I'm here, might as well be useful." Nora wanted to argue, but the truth was she'd been stretching their wood supply for weeks, burning as little as possible to make it last. "I'll make coffee," she said finally. By the time she had breakfast ready, Colt had split enough wood to last them 3 weeks. He came inside at her call, ducking through the low doorway. In the cabin's close quarters, he seemed larger somehow, not threatening, just present in a way that made the space feel less empty. Eli was already at the table watching Colt with that same wary curiosity from yesterday. "You're still here." "Storm kept me." Colt hung his coat on the peg by the door. "But the road should be passable now." "Oh." The boy's face fell just for a moment before he caught himself and looked down at his plate. They ate in awkward silence cornmeal mush and coffee that was mostly chicory. Nora found herself acutely aware of how little she had to offer, how bare her table was despite yesterday's supplies. A man who'd just done an hour's hard labor deserved better than this. "It's good," Colt said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Hot food and a warm room. That's more than most." "You're easy to please." "I've learned to be." He took another sip of coffee. "Roof's leaking. Saw the water damage last night." Nora's hand tightened on her cup. "I know. I've been meaning to fix it, but you need to get up there, and you need materials, and you need time you don't have." He set down his cup. "I could patch it. Before I go." "No." The word came out sharper than she meant. "You've done enough. More than enough. I won't take advantage of your kindness. It's not taking advantage if I'm offering. It is when I have nothing to give in return." Colt looked at her steadily. "You gave me shelter from the storm, gave me a hot meal. That's not nothing. That's barely anything compared to what you've—" "Ma." Eli's small voice cut through the tension. "Maybe let him help. Please." Nora looked at her son's pleading face, then at Colt's calm, patient expression. Pride warred with practicality. Pride had kept her going through 8 months of hell, but pride wouldn't keep the rain out when spring came. "Just the roof," she said finally. "And then you go. Agreed?" Agreed. But the roof led to the chinking, and the chinking led to the loose boards on the porch. And somehow afternoon came and went, and Colt was still there, working with the quiet intensity of a man who'd found purpose in motion. Nora tried to busy herself inside, but she kept finding reasons to glance out the window. Watching him work was hypnotic, the way he moved with complete economy. No wasted effort, no frustration when something didn't fit right the first time. He just adjusted and tried again. "Why do you think he's really staying?" Eli asked from his spot by the stove where he was supposed to be practicing his letters. "He's not staying. He's just finishing the work he started. But he keeps finding more work." "Eli, I like him, Ma. He don't talk down to me like other grown-ups do, and he looks at you different." "Different how?" The question escaped before Nora could stop it. Eli shrugged, returning to his slate. "Like you're not invisible." The observation hit harder than it should have. Was that how people had been looking at her? Like she'd become transparent, a ghost haunting her own life? Or had she just stopped noticing anyone's gaze after months of seeing only pity or judgment? When Colt came in at dusk, his hands were scraped raw despite the cold. Nora had water heating and clean rags waiting. "Sit," she said, in a tone that brooked no argument. He sat. She took his hands, carefully cleaning the cuts with gentle efficiency. His fingers were calloused, scarred in places from old injuries. Working hands. Honest hands. "You'll get infection if you're not careful," she murmured. "I've had worse." "That's not reassuring." She wrapped the worst of the cuts with strips of clean cloth. "There. Try not to use them too hard tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" He looked up at her, surprise flickering across his face. "Thought I was leaving today." Nora busied herself putting away the medical supplies. "You said the roof was patched, but I saw you looking at the barn. The whole north wall is pulling away from the frame." "That's not the deal we made." "The deal was you'd fix what needed fixing before you left." She met his eyes. "The barn needs fixing." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that they were negotiating something larger than carpentry. Colt's expression remained neutral, but she saw the slight relaxation in his shoulders, the way his hands uncurled in his lap. "One more day then," he said. "For the barn." But one day became 3. The barn led to the chicken coop that had collapsed under the snow. The chicken coop led to the fence that wouldn't hold livestock come spring. And with each repair, Nora felt her resistance crumbling like the old mortar Colt was replacing. He never presumed, never pushed. At night, he returned to the barn without being asked, keeping the proper distance. But during the day, his presence filled the homestead with a sense of order she'd forgotten existed. Work got done. Things got fixed. And slowly, dangerously, she began to rely on the sound of his footsteps in the yard, the sight of his broad back bent over some task, the quiet competence that made impossible problems seem manageable. On the 4th morning, she found him in the barn before dawn, and this time he wasn't working. He was just sitting on an overturned bucket, staring at nothing, his face carved with exhaustion. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, startled. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. I'm usually up before sunrise." She stepped inside, pulling the door closed against the cold. "Are you all right?" "Fine." "That's not an answer." Colt was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with something that might have been shame. "Keep thinking I should go. Keep making plans to saddle up and ride out. But then I see that list in my head, all the things still broken, and I tell myself just one more day, just one more fix." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Starting to worry I'm making excuses." "For what?" "For staying somewhere I don't belong." The words hung in the cold air between them. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs because she knew what he was really asking. What they were both afraid to voice. "Do you want to go?" she asked quietly. "No." The admission seemed to cost him. "And that's the problem." "Why is that a problem?" "Because I'm a drifter, Mrs. Hayes. Been moving for 10 years, never staying anywhere longer than a season. Got no land, no prospects, nothing to offer except a strong back and hands that know how to fix things." He looked at her directly. "And because you're a respectable widow, trying to keep your head above water, and the last thing you need is town gossip about some cowboy camping in your barn." "Let them gossip." "You say that now. I mean it." The fierceness in her own voice surprised her. "You think I care what those people think? The same people who watched Garrett humiliate me and did nothing. Who cross the street when they see me coming. Who whisper that I should be more practical and find another husband like I'm livestock to be traded." She moved closer, her hands clenched at her sides. "They stopped seeing me as a person months ago, Mr. Mercer. So their opinions stopped mattering. But your boy, my boy has had more hot meals this week than he had all last month. He's sleeping through the night for the first time since his father died. And today, I caught him smiling. Actually smiling." Her voice cracked. "So if you're asking my permission to stay a little longer, the answer is yes. Stay, please." Colt's throat worked as he swallowed hard. "I won't be a burden." "You're not. You're—" She struggled for the right word. "Your help. Real help. The kind that doesn't come with judgment or expectations. Do you know how rare that is?" "I know how rare you are." The words were barely above a whisper. Woman who keeps going when everything's against her. Who maintains her dignity even when the world tries to strip it away. Who raises a good boy in spite of impossible circumstances. He stood slowly, and she realized how close they were standing. That's rare. That's worth staying for. The moment stretched between them, charged with everything they weren't saying. Then Nora took a deliberate step back, wrapping her arms around herself. "Then it settled. You'll stay. At least until—" She faltered. "Until when?" "Until spring. Until the work was done. Until one of them found the courage to name what was building between them. Until I'm not useful anymore." Colt finished quietly. "That's not what I meant." "I know, but it's a good place to start." They worked out an arrangement. Colt would handle the heavy repairs and split wood. In exchange, Nora would provide meals and shelter. It was practical, businesslike, a transaction between two people helping each other survive the winter. That's what they told themselves. But the truth revealed itself in smaller moments. In the way Colt taught Eli to read animal tracks in the snow, his voice patient as he explained the difference between deer and elk prints. In the way Nora found herself laughing at something Colt said, actually laughing a sound she'd thought she'd forgotten how to make. In the way they'd developed routines without discussing them, coffee at dawn work, until dusk dinner by lamplight, with Eli chattering between them. The homestead began to transform. Fences stood straight. The barn's walls were square and true. The roof no longer leaked, and Colt had even managed to replace the oiled paper on the window with real glass traded from a passing peddler for carpentry work. And with each repair, each improvement, the weight Nora had been carrying began to lift. She started to sleep through the night, started to plan beyond the next day's survival, started to remember that she was 32 years old, not ancient, not used up, not finished. But the town noticed too. It started with sideways glances when she went to the trading post, the one shopkeeper who'd still do business with her, though at inflated prices. Then came the whispers that followed her down the street. By the third week, the whispers had found voices. Mrs. Thornton stopped her outside the post office, her face arranged in concerned condescension. "My dear Mrs. Hayes, I feel I must speak to you about appearances." Nora kept her expression neutral. "What about them?" "There's been talk about the man staying on your property." Mrs. Thornton lowered her voice to a scandalized whisper. "Unmarried people living in such close quarters. It's simply not proper." "Mr. Mercer stays in the barn. I stay in the cabin. There's nothing improper about it." "The appearance of impropriety is just as damaging as the reality, dear. You must think of your son. What kind of example are you setting? The example that when someone helps you, you accept it with grace instead of suspicion." Nora's voice remained calm, but steel ran through it. "Mr. Mercer has done more for me and my son in 3 weeks than this entire town has done in 8 months. So forgive me if I don't much care about appearances." Mrs. Thornton drew herself up, her face pinched with disapproval. "Well, I was trying to help, but I can see you're determined to ruin yourself. Don't come crying to the church when your reputation is completely destroyed. My reputation was destroyed the day my husband drank himself to death and left me penniless. At least now I have a roof that doesn't leak." She walked away before Mrs. Thornton could respond, her hands shaking with anger and something that felt dangerously close to triumph. Let them talk. Let them judge. She was tired of living her life by their rules. But that night, Eli came to her with tears streaming down his face. "What happened, baby?" She pulled him close, her heart clenching with familiar dread. "Billy Garrett said he said a bad word, Ma, about you and Mr. Mercer. Said his pa says you're no better than the saloon girls." Eli's small body shook with sobs. "I hit him. I know I shouldn't, but I couldn't let him talk about you like that." Nora held him tighter, her own eyes burning. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart." "But Billy's pa is the shopkeeper. What if he won't let us buy things now? What if—" "Shh, we'll figure it out. We always do." But her words felt hollow, because Mrs. Thornton had been right about one thing. In a town like Sheridan, reputation mattered, and hers was being systematically destroyed by people who'd rather tear down a struggling widow than examine their own lack of charity. She didn't tell Colt immediately, but he noticed Eli's bruised knuckles at dinner and pulled the story out with gentle persistence. When he heard, his jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. "I'll leave," he said. "Tonight. It's not worth this." "No." Nora's response was immediate and fierce. "That's what they want. For you to leave, for me to go back to being desperate and grateful for their scraps. I won't give them the satisfaction." But the boy is learning that we don't abandon people just because others disapprove, that loyalty and kindness matter more than gossip. She met Colt's eyes across the table. "Unless you want to leave. If this is too much trouble, I'll understand." Colt looked at Eli, then back at Nora. Something resolved itself in his expression, a decision made. "I'm not leaving. Not unless you ask me to. Then it's settled. They'll make it harder on you. On both of you. They can try." Nora's voice carried a strength she'd almost forgotten she possessed. "But I'm done being afraid of their judgment." The confrontation came 2 days later. Nora was in the yard hanging laundry when 3 riders approached Sheriff Dalton, Mr. Garrett, and Reverend Michaels. Her stomach dropped, but she kept her hands steady as she pinned another sheet to the line. "Mrs. Hayes?" The sheriff dismounted, his expression uncomfortable. "Need to have a word." "About what, Sheriff?" "About your situation here." He glanced toward the barn where Colt was repairing a wagon wheel. "There's been complaints about a man living on your property. Mr. Mercer is doing repairs in exchange for meals. It's a business arrangement." "Come now, Mrs. Hayes." Reverend Michaels stepped forward, his voice dripping with false concern. "We all know what this looks like. A young widow and an unmarried man living together. Living separately." Nora interrupted. "He stays in the barn. The appearance is still problematic." Garrett shifted his weight, looking anywhere but at her face. "For your own good and the boys, we think it's best if this arrangement ends." "For my own good." Nora repeated the words, slowly tasting the bitterness. "Tell me, Mr. Garrett, was it for my own good, when you refused me credit and humiliated me in front of the entire town, when you suggested I sell my home because I'd fallen on hard times?" Garrett's face reddened. "That was business. And this is my business. Mine." She looked at each man in turn. "When my husband died, not one of you offered help. When I was starving, when my son was cold, when I needed work. Where were you? Where was your Christian charity, Reverend? Where was your community spirit, Sheriff?" "Now, Mrs. Hayes," Dalton began. "No." The word cracked like a whip. "You don't get to ignore me for months and then show up with your moral judgments. Mr. Mercer has shown me more respect and kindness in 3 weeks than this entire town has shown in 8 months. He's helped me repair my property, provided for my son, and never once asked for anything improper in return." Her voice rose, years of suppressed anger finally finding its target. "So, you can take your concerns and your appearances and ride right back to town, because your charity ended the day mine began." The three men stood frozen, clearly not expecting this response. The meek, desperate widow they'd come to intimidate had vanished, replaced by someone who'd found her spine again. "You're making a mistake," Michael said stiffly. "When your reputation is completely destroyed, don't expect the church to—" "My reputation." Nora laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "My reputation was destroyed when I married a drunk who gambled away everything we had. Then again when he died and left me with nothing. Then again when I had to beg for food in Garrett's store. You want to talk about reputation? At least now I have one I chose myself." Colt had stopped working and now stood near the barn watching but not interfering. Nora was grateful for that. This was her fight. Sheriff Dalton cleared his throat. "Just wanted to make sure everything's proper. That you're not being coerced." "The only coercion I've experienced in this town came from people threatening my livelihood unless I behaved a certain way. Mr. Mercer has never coerced me into anything. He's never demanded anything. He saw someone who needed help and he helped. If that's improper in your eyes, then your eyes need examining." The sheriff nodded slowly, something like respect flickering across his weathered face. "Fair enough. We'll be going then." He tipped his hat. "Ma'am." The three rode away, and Nora's knees went weak. She grabbed the clothesline for support, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She'd done it. She'd stood up to them, and she hadn't broken. Colt appeared at her side, his hand hovering near her elbow without quite touching. "You all right?" "I think so." She laughed shakily. "Did I really just do that?" "You did. And it was something to see." His voice carried warmth and what might have been pride. "Didn't know you had that much fire in you." "Neither did I." She straightened, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "They'll talk more now, make it worse." "Probably. You sure you want to stay? It's only going to get harder." Colt looked at her, then really looked the way he had that first day outside Garrett's store, like she was someone worth seeing. "I stayed through the storm, through the gossip, through three men riding out here to try and run me off." He paused. "I'm not leaving, Nora, not unless you want me gone." It was the first time he'd used her given name. The intimacy of it sent warmth through her chest, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "I don't want you gone," she said quietly. "Then I'm staying." That night after Eli had gone to bed, Nora stood at the window watching lamplight spill from the barn. She thought about the past 3 weeks, about how the homestead had transformed from a place of desperate survival into something that felt almost like a home. About how Eli laughed more, ate better, slept sounder. About how she'd started to feel like a person again instead of a ghost. And she thought about Colt, about his quiet strength, his patient hands, the way he treated her son with respect instead of condescension. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't watching, with something in his eyes that made her breath catch. She was falling for him. Had been falling since that first day, probably. Since he'd followed her out of Garrett's store and offered help without judgment. Since he'd chosen to see her humanity when everyone else saw only scandal or pity. It terrified her. But it also felt like the first truly honest thing in her life since Tom died. Maybe longer than that. Outside, the lamplight in the barn flickered and went dark. Nora turned away from the window, her heart full of questions she wasn't ready to answer. But for the first time in months, maybe years, she felt something dangerous and precious unfurling in her chest. Hope. March came in with false promises of spring warm afternoons that melted the top layer of snow only for it to freeze solid again at night. Nora found herself caught in a similar thaw, her carefully maintained distance from Colt, softening in small dangerous increments. It started with breakfast conversations that lingered past necessity. Colt talking about the years he'd spent drifting through Colorado and Montana, working ranches and mines, never staying long enough to put down roots. Nora sharing memories of her childhood in Pennsylvania before her father died and her mother married Tom Hayes in a desperate bid for security that had trapped them both. "Did you love him?" Colt asked one morning, the question emerging so naturally that Nora answered before she could guard herself. "I thought I did. Or maybe I just loved the idea of being chosen." She traced the rim of her coffee cup. "Tom could be charming when he wanted to be. Made me feel like I was something special. By the time I realized the charm was all performance, we were already married, and I was pregnant." "He hurt you?" It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Not with his fists. Tom wasn't that kind of drunk. He just disappeared. Into bottles, into card games, into promises he'd never keep. Left me alone in every way that mattered." Colt was quiet for a moment. "My father was like that. Not a drunk, but gone all the same. Left when I was 7. Ma tried to make it work, but by the time I was 10, we were living rough. She died the winter I turned 12. His voice remained steady, but she heard the old pain underneath. "That's when I started stealing eggs. When the man found me." "The one who fed you?" "Yeah. Old German farmer named Klaus Becker. He sat me down at his table, gave me eggs and bread and milk, then sent me on my way with a sack of potatoes." Colt's mouth curved slightly. "Never saw him again. But I never forgot what it felt like to be seen as human instead of vermin." "Is that why you helped me? Because you saw yourself?" "Maybe at first. But that's not why I stayed." He met her eyes across the table. "I stayed because of who you are. The strength in you. The way you love that boy, even when you're drowning. The way you never gave up even when you had every reason to." The words settled between them heavy with meaning. They both felt, but neither named. Nora looked away, first, her heart hammering. "More coffee?" she asked, her voice not quite steady. "Sure." They didn't speak of it again that day, but something had shifted, a line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Eli noticed, of course. Children always did. He started manufacturing reasons for Nora and Colt to work together, asking Colt to help his mother with tasks she could easily handle alone, or requesting that Nora bring lunch to wherever Colt was working instead of calling him to the cabin. "You're not subtle," Nora told her son one afternoon as they prepared dinner together. "Don't know what you mean, Ma." Eli's face was pure innocence. "You're matchmaking, and you need to stop." "Why?" "You like him. He likes you. Everybody can see it except you two." Eli Hayes. "Pa's been dead almost a year, Ma. You're allowed to be happy again." The boy's voice cracked slightly. "I want you to be happy." Nora pulled him into a fierce hug, blinking back tears. "I am happy, baby. Happier than I've been in years. But it's not that simple." "Why not?" Because she was terrified. Because letting herself love Colt meant risking everything again. Because the town's judgment was only getting worse, and she didn't know if she had the strength to withstand it indefinitely. Because Colt was a drifter by nature, and she didn't know if he could really stay, or if one morning she'd wake to find him gone. But she couldn't say any of that to her 9-year-old son, so she just held him tighter and said, "Sometimes grown-up things are complicated." "Grown-ups make things complicated," Eli muttered. "Kids just see what's true." He was right, she realized. Children hadn't learned to complicate love with fear and doubt and all the ways the world could break you. They just saw what was true. And the truth was that she was falling in love with Colt Mercer. The realization should have terrified her more than it did. Instead, it felt like finally exhaling after holding her breath for years. That night, a late winter storm rolled in with unexpected violence. By the time they'd finished dinner, wind was screaming through the canyon, and snow fell so thick they could barely see the barn from the cabin window. "You can't go out in that," Nora said as Colt moved toward his coat. "I'll be fine. Made it through worse." "Colt, you can't even see 10 feet. You'll get turned around and freeze to death 20 yards from shelter." She heard the edge of panic in her voice and tried to moderate it. "Please, just stay. Sleep by the stove. Eli can take the loft, you can have his bed, and I'll take the floor by the stove, not putting a child out of his bed." Colt looked at Eli, who was watching with barely concealed hope. "If that's all right with you, son." "Yes, sir." Eli was already pulling blankets from the chest. "Ma's got extra quilts. You can make a real comfortable spot right here." They arranged bedding while the storm raged outside. Eli climbed to the loft, chattering with excitement about Colt staying inside for the first time. Nora retreated behind the curtain that separated her sleeping area from the main room, her heart beating too fast. She lay awake for hours listening to the storm and the quiet sounds of Colt settling in by the stove. She heard him shift, heard the creak of the floorboards, heard his breathing even out into sleep. And she thought about how natural it felt having him here. How right, how terrifying. Sometime past midnight, she heard Eli cry out. She was moving before she fully woke, pulling the curtain aside to find Colt already at the base of the loft ladder. "Nightmare," Colt said quietly. "Want me to go up?" "No, I'll—" But Eli's voice cut her off. "Mr. Mercer, can you come up? Please." Colt looked at Nora for permission. She nodded, and he climbed the ladder with careful grace. She heard their voices low and soothing Colt's deep rumble and Eli's frightened whisper. Heard Colt tell a story about camping in the mountains and seeing the northern lights, his voice weaving calm through her son's fear. By the time Colt climbed back down, Eli was asleep again, and Nora's eyes were wet. "Thank you," she whispered. He was dreaming about his father, about the day he died. Colt moved closer, his expression troubled. "He heard you crying that night. Heard you say you were relieved. He's been carrying guilt about feeling the same way." Nora's hand flew to her mouth. "He never said—" Kids hold things in, especially when they're trying to protect their parents. Colt's voice was gentle. Told him it's okay to feel relief when suffering ends. That loving someone and being glad their pain is over aren't contradictions. What did he say? Asked if I thought his pa was in heaven despite the drinking. Told him I wasn't qualified to judge, but that mercy's bigger than we know. Colt paused. Hope that was all right. It was perfect. Nora wiped at her eyes. You're good with him. Patient. He needs that. He's a good boy. Makes it easy. They stood in the dim firelight, the storm creating an intimate isolation around them. Nora became acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth radiating from Colt's body, of the way he was looking at her, with something raw and honest in his eyes. Nora. Her name on his lips was a question and a confession all at once. Don't, she whispered. Please. If you say it, if we name it, everything changes. Everything's already changed. He lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. Changed the moment I saw you outside that store. Changed every day since. You could still leave. Ride out when the storm clears. Go back to drifting. Be free. I've been drifting 10 years. His hand cupped her face, now his touch achingly gentle. But when I saw you, I stopped moving, found something worth staying for. I'm broken, Colt. I'm poor and damaged, and the whole town thinks I'm a scandal. I come with a child and debt and a homestead that's barely holding together. That's not freedom. That's everything I've been looking for. He said it so simply, so certainly, that her breath caught. You think I want freedom? I've had freedom. It's lonely and cold and it means nothing. You're home. You and Eli, this place, the work we do together. That's what matters. We barely know each other. I know you get up before dawn to make sure the fire's warm when Eli wakes. I know you sing when you think no one's listening. I know you're terrified of hoping because hope's hurt you before. I know you'd go hungry yourself to feed your son. I know you're the strongest person I've ever met." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "What else do I need to know?" Nora's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her palms. "I'm scared." "Me too." "What if this doesn't work? What if it does?" He leaned his forehead against hers, and she felt his breath warm against her lips. "What if we stop being afraid and just let this be what it is? And what is it? Something real, something true, something worth fighting for." The kiss happened slowly, inevitably, like weather. Colt's lips touched hers with reverence, as if she were something precious that might break. Nora melted into him, her hands sliding up to his shoulders, as 10 months of loneliness and fear and desperate hope poured out in a single perfect moment. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Colt kept his arms around her like he couldn't bear to let go. "Stay with me," Nora whispered against his chest. "Not just tonight. Stay. As long as you'll have me." His voice was rough with emotion. "As long as you'll let me." "What about the town, the gossip? They'll make our lives hell. They can talk all winter." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "We'll be warm." She laughed shakily, then sobered. "I need to be sure you understand what you're choosing. This isn't just me. It's Eli, too. It's responsibility and commitment and being tied to one place. You said you've been drifting for 10 years. And I'm done. I'm tired of running from myself, tired of never mattering to anyone, tired of waking up alone." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I want to matter. To you. To Eli. I want to wake up knowing I'm building something instead of just passing through. That's not a burden. That's a gift. Even if we can't marry. Not yet, anyway. Not until the town stops talking. That could take years." Colt smiled slightly. "But there's a circuit preacher who comes through in spring. If you'd consider." Nora's heart stopped. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm asking if you'd let me stay permanent. If you'd let me be a father to Eli, not just a man who's passing through. If you'd let me court you proper with intention." He swallowed hard. "And yeah, eventually if you'd marry me. Not because you need someone to fix your roof or split wood, but because you want me. Because we choose each other." Tears spilled over, but this time they were different. Not grief or fear or exhaustion. Something lighter. Something that felt dangerously like joy. "I want that," she whispered. "I want all of that. But Colt? But the town will explode. But people will talk. But it'll be hard." He brushed away her tears with gentle fingers. "I know. And I don't care. Do you? Did she?" Nora thought of Mrs. Thornton's pinched face of the sheriff's visit, of the whispers that followed her through the streets. She thought of 8 months of slow starvation, of begging for credit, of the hollow look in Eli's eyes when she'd had nothing to give him. Then she thought of the past 6 weeks, of laughter returning to her home, of Eli learning to read tracks and chop wood, of waking up knowing someone else cared whether she lived or died, of finding herself again in the reflection of Colt's steady regard. "No," she said firmly. "I don't care. Let them talk." Colt's smile was like sunrise. He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands tangling in her hair. Nora kissed him back with all the hunger and hope she'd been suppressing, feeling something locked and frozen inside her finally crack open. When they finally pulled apart, both flushed and breathless, she laughed. "What?" Colt asked, his own smile crooked and wonderful. "Eli's going to be insufferable. He'll think he orchestrated this whole thing." "He kind of did." "Don't tell him that. His head's big enough already." They settled back by the fire, Colt in his makeshift bed, and Nora on the floor beside him, their hands clasped between them like teenagers. They talked in whispers until the storm began to ease, sharing histories and hopes, and all the small truths that build intimacy. Colt told her about the years he'd spent running from himself, trying to outpace the loneliness that had defined his life since childhood. About the men he'd worked alongside who'd become brothers for a season, then strangers. About the places he'd seen and the emptiness that had followed him everywhere. Nora told him about the girl she'd been in Pennsylvania, full of dreams about love and adventure. About the reality of marriage to a man who saw her as property. About the slow death of hope and the determination that had kept her going even when giving up seemed easier. "I never thought I'd feel this again," she admitted as dawn began to gray the windows. This possibility, like the future might hold something besides survival. It does now. Colt lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "We'll make it hold whatever we want." "Is it always this easy for you? Being certain?" "Nothing about this is easy, but it's right. And I've spent enough years doing what's easy to know the difference." The storm cleared by mid-morning, leaving the world buried in fresh snow that sparkled like crushed diamonds. Eli came down from the loft to find Nora and Colt sitting close by the fire, and his face split into a grin so wide it threatened to crack. "Finally," he announced. "Took you long enough." "Eli." Nora's face flamed. "What, I've been waiting weeks for you two to figure it out." The boy looked at Colt with sudden seriousness. "You're staying right for real this time." "For real," Colt confirmed. "If that's all right with you." "It's all right." Eli threw himself at Colt, who caught him with surprised grace. "Can I call you Pa? Or is that... I know you're not actually." Colt's throat worked, and when he spoke his voice was thick with emotion. "You can call me whatever feels right to you, son. Pa would be... I'd be honored." Nora turned away, pressing her hand to her mouth as tears came again. Happy tears this time. Healing tears. The kind that washed away old pain instead of adding to it. They spent the day together, the three of them doing ordinary tasks that felt extraordinary in their simple rightness. Colt and Eli dug paths through the snow, while Nora cooked stew with the last of their winter stores. They ate together, laughing at Eli's increasingly wild stories about tracking rabbits. They played checkers by lamplight, with Eli beating Colt 3 games straight. And when night fell and it was time for bed, Colt pulled on his coat to return to the barn without being asked. But Eli stopped him at the door. "You don't have to go out there anymore. Do you?" The boy looked between his mother and Colt. If you're going to be family, shouldn't you stay in the house?" "Eli, it's not that simple," Nora began, but Colt squeezed her hand. "Your ma and I aren't married yet," he said to Eli. "And until we are, it's important that we do things proper. Not because of what people think, but because we want to honor each other. Understand?" Eli nodded slowly. "When's the wedding?" "Soon as the preacher comes through in April." Colt looked at Nora. "If your ma says yes." "She will," Eli said confidently. "Won't you, Ma?" Nora laughed through fresh tears. Yes, I will." "Then I'm going to have a pay again." Eli's voice was small and wondering. "A real one this time. One who stays." Colt knelt down to Eli's level. "I'm staying. Through everything. Through hard times and good times. Through winters and summers. Through whatever comes. That's a promise, and I don't break my promises." "I know." Eli hugged him fierce and quick, then scrambled up the ladder to the loft, suddenly shy. Colt stood, settling his hat on his head. "Walk me out." They stepped into the cold together, and Nora wrapped her shawl tight as they walked toward the barn. Halfway there, Colt stopped and turned to her. "I meant what I said. About staying. About all of it." "I know. I believe you." She reached up to touch his face, the stubble rough against her palm. "But you should know I'm difficult. I'm stubborn and prideful, and I've been alone so long I don't always know how to let people help." Good thing I'm patient. And I come with baggage, with memories and wounds, and so do I. We'll help each other carry it. He caught her hand against his cheek. Stop trying to talk me out of this. I'm not. I want you to know what you're getting into. I'm getting a woman who's survived hell with her dignity intact. A boy who needs a father who'll actually show up. A homestead that needs work but has good bones. And a future that might be hard but won't be lonely. He smiled. Think I can handle it. She stood on her toes and kissed him, pouring everything she couldn't say into the press of her lips against his. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Colt rested his forehead against hers. April can't come fast enough, he muttered. We'll make it. She squeezed his hand. Together. Together, he echoed. He kissed her once more, soft and sweet, then headed for the barn. Nora stood in the cold, watching him go, her heart full to bursting. Behind her, the cabin glowed with lamplight. Inside, her son was safe and warm and happy. And in 6 weeks, she'd marry a man who'd seen her at her lowest and chosen to stay. The future still held uncertainty. The town would still talk. Money would still be tight. Life would still be hard. But she wouldn't face it alone anymore. And that made all the difference. The announcement came on a Sunday morning in late March when Nora walked into church with Colt at her side and Eli between them. The congregation's collective intake of breath was audible enough to hear from the back pew where they settled. Reverend Michael stumbled over the opening hymn, his eyes fixed on the unlikely trio. Mrs. Thornton's fan snapped open with such force it was a wonder it didn't break. And when the service ended, people practically fled through the doors to avoid speaking to them. All except one. Mrs. Hayes. Old Mrs. Henderson approached slowly, leaning heavy on her cane. She was the widow of a cavalry officer, ancient and sharp-eyed, and generally regarded as the moral authority of Sheridan. I'd like a word. Nora braced herself for another lecture about propriety. But Mrs. Henderson surprised her by turning to Colt instead. You're the young man who's been helping Mrs. Hayes with her homestead. Yes, ma'am. Colt removed his hat respectfully. And you intend to marry her? Yes, ma'am. Soon as the circuit preacher comes through. Mrs. Henderson studied him with eyes that had witnessed 50 years of frontier life and could spot a lie at 40 paces. Why? Because I love her. Because I want to build a life with her and her son. Because she deserves someone who'll stand beside her instead of watching her struggle. Pretty words. What happens when pretty words aren't enough? When the work gets hard and the winters get long and the money runs short? Colt met her gaze steadily. Then I'll work harder. I've been poor before, been hungry before, been alone before. None of that scares me. What scares me is the thought of her facing those things without help, because people think it's more proper for her to suffer alone than to accept the hand of someone who cares. A smile ghosted across Mrs. Henderson's weathered face. Good answer. She turned to Nora. You sure about this girl? More sure than I've been about anything in years. Even knowing what it'll cost you, the talk won't stop just because you marry him. Some folks will see it as confirmation of what they suspected all along. Let them. Nora lifted her chin. I spent 8 months caring what people thought, and it nearly killed me. I'm done living my life by other people's rules. About damn time. Mrs. Henderson thumped her cane for emphasis, and several nearby churchgoers gasped at her language. My late husband used to say that propriety was just fear wearing fancy clothes. You two want my blessing. You have it. And tell that circuit preacher when he gets here that I'll stand witness at your wedding. Let the gossips chew on that. She shuffled away, leaving Nora and Colt staring after her in stunned silence. Eli tugged at Colt's sleeve. Does that mean we won? Won what, son? The fight with the town. If Mrs. Henderson's on our side, doesn't that mean we won? Colt knelt down to Eli's level. This isn't about winning or losing. It's about living according to what's right instead of what's easy. Mrs. Henderson understands that. But a lot of folks won't, so the fight's not over. Understand?" Eli nodded seriously. "But we're still going to be a family, right? No matter what people say. No matter what anyone says." Colt ruffled the boy's hair. "That's a promise." The ride home was quiet but comfortable. The three of them squeezed onto the wagon bench. Nora felt something settle in her chest, not quite peace, but something close to it. A sense that they were moving in the right direction, even if the path was steep. When they reached the homestead, Colt helped her down from the wagon, with hands that lingered just a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met, and she saw her own hope reflected back at her. "What do you want to call this place?" he asked suddenly. "Every homestead should have a name." "I don't know. I never thought about it." "Pa used to call it the Hayes place," Eli offered. "But that was before. Maybe it needs a new name now." Nora looked around at the land Tom had claimed but never loved. The cabin that had been a prison of poverty and shame. The fields that had lain fallow because one person couldn't work them alone. All of it transformed in the past 2 months from a monument to failure into something that might actually become a home. "Hope Creek," she said quietly. "There's that little creek that runs through the south pasture. And hope, that's what this place represents now. A second chance." Colt's hand found hers. "Hope Creek. I like it." "Can we make a sign?" Eli was already racing toward the barn. "I can paint it." "We'll make a sign," Colt called after him, then turned back to Nora. "Hope Creek it is. A new name for a new beginning." "Are you sure about this?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Really sure. Because once we're married, there's no going back. You'll be tied to this place, to me, to Eli. No more drifting. No more freedom to just ride away when things get hard." "I don't want to ride away." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I want to stay. I want to plant things and watch them grow. I want to wake up in the same bed every morning and know exactly where I belong. I want to teach Eli to ride and help you with the planting and build something that lasts." He paused, his expression intense. "I've been free, Nora. Free is just another word for alone. This us. This is what I choose." She kissed him, then, not caring that they were standing in the open yard where anyone passing on the road might see. When she pulled back, his eyes were dark with want and something deeper. "April feels like forever," she whispered. "We'll fill the time. Got plenty to do before the wedding." He glanced toward the fields. "Need to get those south acres ready for planting. Fix the chicken coop proper so we can get some hens. And I was thinking if we can afford it, we might get a milk cow. Fresh milk would be good for Eli." "We can't afford it." "Not yet. But I've got those pelts I've been collecting all winter. Should fetch enough to cover a decent cow and some chickens, maybe even some seed for the garden." Nora stared at him. "You've been saving pelts for us." "For the homestead. Figured if I was going to stay, I should contribute more than just labor." He looked almost embarrassed. "Wanted to have something to offer. Something more than just myself." "Colt Mercer, you are the most infuriating, wonderful man." Her voice cracked with emotion. "Don't you know you're enough? Just you exactly as you are. Never been enough for anyone before." "Well, you're enough for me. More than enough." She squeezed his hands. "But I won't say no to a milk cow." They spent the afternoon planning, their heads bent together over paper as they sketched out where the garden would go, how many chickens they could manage, what crops might do well in their soil. Eli contributed his own ideas, a dog to help with herding a treehouse in the big cottonwood by the creek, a rope swing. "We'll get there," Colt promised, watching the boy's enthusiasm with visible affection. "One thing at a time. But the dog that we can do. Know a rancher outside of Buffalo who's got a litter of cattle dogs. Been meaning to ride out there anyway." "Really?" Eli's eyes went wide. "A real dog just for me?" "For the homestead." But you'd be responsible for training and feeding. Think you can handle that? Yes, sir. Eli threw his arms around Colt's neck, nearly knocking him off his chair. Best pa ever, even before you're officially my pa. Over Eli's shoulder, Colt's eyes met Nora's. The raw emotion there, gratitude and wonder and a kind of desperate joy, made her heart ache in the best possible way. He'd been alone so long. They both had. And now they were building something neither of them had dared to imagine. The next weeks flew by in a blur of preparation. Colt traded his pelts for a gentle milk cow named Daisy, 6 laying hens and seed for the garden. He rode to Buffalo and returned with a cattle dog puppy, a clever-eyed blue heeler that Eli immediately named Scout. Together they plowed the south field, Nora guiding the old horse while Colt and Eli worked the plow. The work was backbreaking. Nora's hands blistered and her shoulders burned, but for the first time in her life, she was working towards something instead of just surviving. She was building a future with her own hands. The town's reaction was predictably mixed. Some folks, emboldened by Mrs. Henderson's approval, began nodding to Nora on the street again. Others doubled down on their disapproval, making their feelings known through pointed silence and turned backs. The worst came from an unexpected source. Nora was at the trading post purchasing thread and needles with money from selling eggs when she heard raised voices outside. She stepped out to find Colt facing down 3 ranch hands she recognized from the Rocking M. Tom's old employer. Something I can help you gentlemen with. Colt's voice was calm, but his body was coiled tight. Just wondering what kind of man moves in on a widow before her husband's cold in the ground. The speaker was Jake Morrison, a bully who'd worked with Tom and shared his fondness for whiskey. Seems mighty convenient, don't it? Her husband dies, leaves her helpless, and here you come to play hero. Her husband's been dead 8 months, and I'm not playing anything. That's not what it looks like from here. Looks like you found yourself an easy mark, lonely widow, ready-made family-free room and board. Jake spat tobacco juice into the dirt. We all know what you're really after. Colt went very still. Say that again. You heard me. You're using her. Once you get bored with playing house, you'll take whatever she's got and ride off. That's what drifters do. Jake Morrison, you shut your filthy mouth. Nora pushed forward, fury overriding caution. You've got no right. I got every right. Tom Hayes was my friend, and I'm not going to stand by while some saddle tramp dishonors his memory by... Colt's fist connected with Jake's jaw with a crack that echoed off the buildings. Jake went down hard, and his 2 companions immediately moved forward. But Colt was ready, his stance balanced and dangerous. I'll fight all 3 of you if that's what it takes. But you leave her alone. His voice was deadly quiet. You want to question my intentions? Fine. You want to say I'm not good enough for her. That's probably true. But you don't get to stand there and imply she's some kind of fool who doesn't know her own mind. Jake climbed to his feet, wiping blood from his split lip. This isn't over. Yeah, it is. Sheriff Dalton appeared from the saloon across the street, his hand resting casual on his gun belt. Jake, you and your boys get moving, and Mercer, keep your hands to yourself. He threw the first insult, Sheriff. Don't care who started it. I'm finishing it. Dalton looked between them. Jake, you got something to say about Mrs. Hayes or her intended, you say it to me, not to him. Clear. Jake glared, but nodded, then stalked off with his companions. Dalton turned to Colt and Nora. You 2 are causing quite a stir. Not our intention, Sheriff. Nora's hands were shaking with adrenaline. We just want to live our lives. I know, and for what it's worth, I think you're doing right by each other. Dalton's weathered face softened slightly. But you should know there's folks in this town who won't let it rest, who think they know better than you what's proper and moral and right. They're going to keep pushing. Let them push, Colt said. We're not leaving. Didn't think you were. Just wanted to warn you. The sheriff tipped his hat. Mrs. Hayes, Mercer. As Dalton walked away, Nora turned to Colt and saw the fury still simmering in his eyes. You didn't have to hit him." "Yes, I did. He called you." Colt bit off the words. "I won't let anyone talk about you like that. I don't care who they are." "Your hand's bleeding." "It's fine." "It's not fine. Come on." She took his arm and led him back toward the wagon. "We're going home. I'll clean it there." They rode in tense silence, Eli sensing the mood and staying quiet in the back of the wagon. When they reached Hope Creek, Nora made Colt sit while she tended to his scraped knuckles. He winced but didn't complain, watching her face as she worked. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "for losing my temper, for making things harder. You were defending me. Don't apologize for that." She wrapped his hand with clean cloth. "But Colt, you can't fight everyone who says something cruel. We'd never stop fighting. So I'm supposed to just stand there and let them—" "No, you're supposed to trust me to handle my own battles, and trust that their words can't hurt me anymore." She met his eyes. "I don't care what Jake Morrison thinks. I don't care what any of them think. The only opinions that matter are ours, yours, mine, and Eli's. The rest is just noise." He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "You're stronger than me." "No, I'm just tired. Too tired to waste energy on people who've already decided to hate me." She pulled back to look at him. "Promise me you won't do that again. Won't let them provoke you into violence." "Can't promise that. If someone threatens you or Eli, then we'll deal with it together. But we can't build a life here if you're constantly at war with the town. Even if they deserve it. Especially if they deserve it." She kissed his bandaged hand. "We win by being happy despite them. By building something good and lasting while they waste their energy on judgment. That's how we win." Colt studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, I'll try. But I make no promises if Morrison comes near you again." "Fair enough." That night, as Nora was putting Eli to bed, the boy asked the question she'd been dreading. "Ma, is Colt going to get in trouble for hitting that man?" "No, baby. The sheriff understood why it happened. That man said mean things about Colt. About you, too." Eli's voice was small. "Is it true what he said, that Colt's just using us?" Nora's heart broke a little. "No, sweetheart. Colt loves us. He's staying because he wants to, not because he has to." "Then why do people keep saying bad things?" "Because sometimes people are more comfortable believing the worst about others than believing in something good. It makes them feel better about their own choices." She smoothed his hair back. "But that's their problem, not ours. I don't like it when people are mean to you and Colt." "I know, but we can't control what other people say or think. We can only control how we respond. And we respond by being kind, being honest, and not letting their cruelty change who we are. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." She kissed his forehead. "Now sleep. Tomorrow we've got planting to do." But sleep didn't come easily for Nora. She lay awake listening to the night sounds, Eli's soft breathing from the loft, Colt's footsteps as he made his final rounds of the property, the distant call of an owl. And she thought about Jake's words about the fight, about the long road still ahead of them. She wasn't naive enough to think the town would suddenly accept them. Change came slowly, if it came at all. But she'd meant what she told Colt. They won by being happy. By building something real and lasting, while others wasted their breath on judgment. The circuit preacher arrived on the 15th of April, riding a tired bay mare and carrying news from the settlements to the south. Nora had been watching the road for 3 days, her nerves stretched tight as wire. "He's here," she called to Colt, who was working in the garden. "The preacher's here." Colt straightened dirt smudged across his forehead and broke into a smile that transformed his whole face. "Then I guess we're getting married." "I guess we are." They'd kept the wedding simple. No fancy dress, no big celebration. Just the preacher, Mrs. Henderson, as witness Eli, standing between them and a handful of words that would tie their lives together legally and permanently. The ceremony took place in the cabin at sunset, golden light streaming through the window to paint everything warm and hopeful. Nora wore her best dress mended carefully but clean and pressed. Colt had shaved and slicked his hair back, looking uncomfortable in a borrowed shirt that was slightly too small. "Dearly beloved." Preacher Walsh began, his voice resonant in the small space. "We are gathered here to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The traditional words washed over Nora like a blessing. She barely heard them, too focused on Colt's face, on the way he was looking at her like she was something miraculous. His hands were warm and steady as he took hers, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Do you, Colt Mercer, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do you part?" "I do." No hesitation, no doubt, just two words that changed everything. "And do you, Nora Hayes, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" Nora's voice came out stronger than she expected. "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me, by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife." Walsh smiled. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Mercer." Colt cupped her face in both hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. Eli cheered, Scout barked, and Mrs. Henderson thumped her cane in approval. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Colt rested his forehead against hers. "Hello, Mrs. Mercer." "Hello, husband." "Congratulations," Mrs. Henderson said, briskly, pulling Nora into a surprising hug. "You've made a good choice, girl. Both of you have." They signed the papers by lamplight, making it official. Nora's hand shook slightly as she wrote her new name, Nora Mercer, in careful script. It looked strange and wonderful, like a promise written in ink. After the preacher and Mrs. Henderson departed, the three of them stood together in the cabin that was now officially theirs. Their home, their future. "So," Eli said, looking between them with barely contained excitement, "are you going to move into the house now, Pa?" "For real?" Colt laughed, the sound free and joyful. "Yeah, son, for real this time." "Finally?" Eli threw his hands up. "Took you long enough." That night, after Eli had fallen asleep in the loft with Scout curled at his feet, Nora and Colt sat together by the fire. Married. Legal. Permanent. It still felt like a dream she might wake from. "What are you thinking?" Colt asked, his arm around her shoulders. "That 6 months ago I was standing outside Garrett's store with 17 cents to my name and no hope. And now," she gestured around the cabin, "now I have everything." "You always had everything. You just needed someone to help you see it. We saved each other." She turned to look at him. "You know that, right? This isn't just you rescuing me. You saved me, but I saved you too." "I know." He kissed her temple. "Been thinking about that. About how I was so lost before I met you. Drifting from place to place, person to person, never mattering to anyone. And then I saw you outside that store and something just clicked. Like I'd finally found what I'd been looking for." "What were you looking for?" "Home. Purpose. Someone to matter to." His voice dropped to a whisper. "You." Nora kissed him, then deep and slow, tasting the promise of their future. When they finally pulled apart, she stood and took his hand. "Come to bed, husband. We've got a lifetime ahead of us, and I want to start it properly." Colt followed her, his eyes dark with want and love and wonder. And as they came together in the privacy of their marriage bed, Nora thought about the journey that had brought them here, about hunger and shame, and the desperate courage it took to accept help, about a stranger who'd seen her humanity and chosen kindness, about building something real from the broken pieces of their separate pasts. Outside, the wind carried the promise of spring. Inside, two people who'd been alone too long were alone no more. Hope Creek had earned its name. Spring transformed Hope Creek into something Nora had only imagined during the darkest winter months. The garden she and Colt planted together erupted with green shoots reaching toward the sun. The chickens laid eggs with reliable abundance. Daisy the cow produced enough milk for their table and extra to trade in town. And every morning, Nora woke beside her husband, still marveling at the simple miracle of not being alone. But marriage, she discovered, came with its own challenges. Colt had spent 10 years living rough, answering to no one moving when restlessness struck. Now, he was tied to land and responsibility to routines and commitments that sometimes chafed. She'd catch him staring at the mountains with an expression she couldn't quite read, and fear would spike through her chest. "You're not thinking of leaving, are you?" she asked one morning in early May, the question escaping before she could stop it. He turned from the window, surprise flickering across his face. "What, no? Why would you think that? You get this look sometimes, like you're somewhere else, somewhere far away." Colt crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "I'm not going anywhere. But I'd be lying if I said the adjustment was easy. I spent so long being accountable to no one but myself. Now I've got a wife and son depending on me. It's—" he struggled for words. "It's good, but it's different. Sometimes I just need to remind myself this is real, that I'm allowed to have this." "You are allowed. You deserve this." She squeezed his hands. "But if you need space sometimes, if you need to ride out alone for a few hours, that's all right too. I won't fall apart if you're not here every second. I know you won't. You're the strongest person I've ever met." He pulled her close. "But I don't want space. I want to learn how to be a husband, a father. I want to figure out how to be still without feeling like I'm giving something up. We'll figure it out together." And they did, slowly, through small compromises and honest conversations. Colt took to riding the property line each morning, checking fences, and giving himself time alone with his thoughts. Nora learned to let him have those moments without anxiety, trusting he'd always come back. Because he always did, returning with stories about what he'd seen or plans for improvements they could make. Eli bloomed under Colt's steady attention. The wary, hungry child who'd watched his mother beg for food transformed into something lighter. He laughed more, asked questions without fear of punishment, started planning a future that extended beyond the next meal. "Pa says when I'm 12 I can help him break horses," Eli announced one evening at dinner. "Says we could make good money at it if we get a reputation for doing it gentle instead of rough." "Your pa's right," Nora said, catching Colt's eye across the table. "Though 12 seems awfully young." "I'll be supervising," Colt assured her. "Won't let him near anything dangerous. But the boy's got a natural way with animals. Shame to waste it." "I'm good with Scout, aren't I?" Eli looked to Colt for confirmation. "You said he minds me better than most dogs twice his age." "That's true. You've done excellent work training him." Colt reached over to ruffle Eli's hair. "But there's a difference between training a puppy and working with a half-wild horse. We'll take it slow. Make sure you're ready." Watching them together, Nora felt something expand in her chest. This was what family was supposed to look like. Not Tom's angry silences and broken promises, but this easy affection, mutual respect plans made together for a shared future. The town's attitude shifted gradually, like ice melting at the edges. Some folks remained hostile, crossing the street to avoid them, or making pointed comments about hasty marriages. But others began to thaw. The trading post owner started greeting Nora by name again. A few ranchers stopped by Hope Creek to ask Colt's advice on various repairs, impressed by the work he'd done on his own property. And Mrs. Henderson made it known that anyone who spoke ill of the Mercers in her presence would answer to her cane. "You're becoming respectable," Nora teased Colt one afternoon as they worked in the garden together. "How does it feel?" "Overrated." But he was smiling. "Though I'll admit it's nice not having to defend your honor every time we go to town." "My hero," she said with exaggerated swooning. He tackled her into the soft dirt, both of them laughing like children. They were still tangled together, covered in soil, and grinning when Eli found them. "You two are ridiculous," he announced, but his smile betrayed his pleasure at seeing them happy. "Completely ridiculous." Nora agreed, not moving from where she was sprawled across Colt's chest, and perfectly content about it. Summer arrived with the kind of heat that made every task feel twice as hard. They worked from dawn until the sun grew too brutal, then retreated to the shade of the cabin during the worst hours. It was during one of these afternoon rests with Eli out fishing at the creek and Colt dozing beside her that Nora realized something had changed. Her monthly courses were late. Very late. She pressed a hand to her stomach, fear and hope warring in her chest. She'd been pregnant before with Eli, but that had been different. She'd been young and terrified, and married to a man who'd seen her pregnancy as an inconvenience. This time, "What are you thinking about?" Colt's voice was drowsy but attentive. "You've got that look." "What look?" "The one where you're working through something and haven't decided whether to share it yet." He rolled to face her, propping his head on his hand. "Talk to me." Nora hesitated, then decided honesty was better than speculation. "I think I might be pregnant." Colt went very still. "Pregnant?" "I'm not certain yet, but I'm late and I've been feeling strange, tired, sick in the mornings." She watched his face anxiously. "Say something." "I'm going to be a father." Wonder spread across his expression like sunrise. "An actual father. Not just someone helping to raise another man's child, but you're already a father to Eli. You know that, right?" "I know, and I love that boy like he's my own blood, but this—" His hand came to rest on her stomach, gentle and reverent. "This is ours. Something we made together. A person who will carry both our names." "You're happy then?" "Happy?" He laughed. The sound choked with emotion. "Nora, I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful and about a dozen other things I don't have words for. But yes, I'm happy." He kissed her softly. "How are you feeling about it?" "The same, all of those things." She covered his hand with hers. "But mostly grateful that I get to do this again with you, that our child will be born into love instead of resentment." "When do you think—" "If I'm right about when it happened, probably January, maybe February." "Winter baby." Colt's smile turned slightly anxious. "We'll need to prepare. Make sure we have everything. Make sure you're safe and—" "Colt." She touched his face. "We have months. And I've done this before. I know what to expect." "But last time you were alone. This time you've got me. I want to do this right. Want to take care of you properly." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her eyes sting with tears. "You already are. You take care of me every day. This won't be any different." But it was different, she discovered over the following weeks. Colt became hypervigilant about her health, insisting she rest more, refusing to let her lift anything heavy. When morning sickness hit hard in July, he held her hair back and brought her weak tea and dry toast without complaint. Eli took the news with typical enthusiasm. "A baby. Really, can we name it after Scout?" "We are not naming your sibling after a dog," Nora said firmly, but she was smiling. "What about Hope?" The boy's face turned serious. "Since we live at Hope Creek now, and since that's kind of what brought us all together." "Hope." Nora and Colt exchanged glances. "If it's a girl," Colt said slowly, "Hope would be a fine name. What do you think, Nora?" "I think our son is wiser than both of us." She pulled Eli into a hug. "Hope Mercer. It's perfect." As her pregnancy progressed, the homestead continued to thrive. The garden produced more than they could eat, so they traded vegetables for tools and supplies in town. The chickens multiplied. Colt built an addition onto the cabin, a proper bedroom, so Eli could move down from the loft before the baby arrived. And slowly, grudgingly, Even the most stubborn townspeople began to accept that the Mercers were here to stay. The turning point came in September when fire broke out on the Rocking M Ranch. They saw the smoke from Hope Creek, a massive plume rising against the evening sky. Colt didn't hesitate saddling his horse immediately despite Nora's protests. "I have to help. That's dozens of men and animals in danger." "But Jake Morrison works there. The men who—" "I don't care about our history. If there's something I can do to help, I'm doing it." He kissed her quickly. "Stay here with Eli. I'll be back as soon as I can." He rode out, and Nora spent the night pacing and praying, one hand pressed to her growing belly. Eli stayed close, Scout at his feet, both of them watching the distant glow against the sky. Colt returned at dawn, covered in soot and ash, exhausted but unharmed. "It's out. Barns are gone, but they saved the house and most of the livestock." "Thank God." Nora threw her arms around him, not caring that he was filthy. "I was so worried." "I know. I'm sorry. But Nora—" His voice held something like wonder. "Jake Morrison thanked me. Actually thanked me. Said he judged me wrong. Said any man who'd ride into danger to help his enemies was someone he'd be proud to call neighbor." "Did you tell him you don't consider him an enemy?" "Didn't need to. Actions spoke louder." Colt pulled back to look at her. "The whole ride home I kept thinking about what you said. About winning by being happy. By building something good. You were right. The work we've done here, the life we've built, that's what changed people's minds. Not fighting. Not arguing. Just living well and honestly." "I'm glad they're finally seeing what I saw that first day outside Garrett's store." "What did you see?" "A man worth taking a chance on." That autumn was the happiest of Nora's life. The work was hard, but rewarding. The harvest exceeded their expectations. Eli started helping with the reading and arithmetic lessons at the small schoolhouse, showing a patience with younger children that reminded Nora of Colt. And her pregnancy progressed without complication, her body growing round with new life. In October, Jake Morrison stopped by Hope Creek with an unexpected offer. "We're starting up a horse-breaking operation. Heard you've got a talent for it, Mercer. Wondered if you'd be interested in working with us. Fair wages, and you can keep your own schedule." Colt glanced at Nora before answering. "That's generous, Jake, but I need to check with my wife first. We make decisions together." Jake's eyebrows rose slightly at that, but he nodded with what looked like respect. "Course, let me know." After he left, Nora turned to Colt. "You should do it. The extra money would help, especially with the baby coming." "Only if you're comfortable with it. I won't be gone more than a few days at a time, but still—" "Colt, I'm pregnant, not helpless. And Eli's here. We'll manage fine." She took his hands. "This is a good opportunity. And it's a sign that you're truly part of this community now. They trust you. They respect your skill. That's worth celebrating." So Colt began working with the Rocking M horses, returning home every few days, with money and stories about difficult colts and stubborn stallions. Eli hung on every word, his dreams of becoming a horse trainer growing more solid and real. Winter crept in early that year, with November bringing snow that lasted. Nora grew large and uncomfortable, her back aching and her sleep fitful. Colt was endlessly patient, rubbing her sore muscles and helping her with tasks that had become difficult. Mrs. Henderson stopped by regularly with advice and reassurance, having delivered half the babies in Sheridan over her long life. "You're doing fine, girl," she said during one visit in late January. "Baby's positioned right. Could be any day now." It happened on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after Nora's prediction. She woke to cramping pain and the unmistakable sensation of labor beginning. Colt, bless him, remained remarkably calm despite the panic in his eyes. "Eli, ride to Mrs. Henderson's, fast as you can." His voice was steady as he helped Nora to the bed. "Tell her it's time." The labor was long, but not difficult. Mrs. Henderson arrived and took charge with brisk efficiency, ordering Colt to boil water and fetch clean linens. Eli hovered anxiously until Mrs. Henderson shooed him outside to wait with Scout. Through the pain and exhaustion, Nora held tight to Colt's hand. He never left her side, whispering encouragement and love, his face etched with worry and wonder. "You're doing so well," he murmured as another contraction peaked. "So strong, so brave." "Easy for you to say," she gasped, but she was smiling through the pain. As evening painted the windows gold, their daughter slipped into the world with a lusty cry that spoke of strength and determination. Mrs. Henderson cleaned her efficiently and placed the squirming bundle on Nora's chest. "Healthy girl. Good lungs. You did well, Nora." But Nora barely heard her. She was staring at her daughter's scrunched face, at the dark fuzz of hair and tiny perfect fingers. "Hello, Hope," she whispered. "Hello, sweet girl. We've been waiting for you." Colt knelt beside the bed, his face wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. "She's perfect. She's absolutely perfect." His finger stroked Hope's tiny hand, and the baby's fingers immediately curled around it. "Look at that. She's already got me. She's got both of us." Nora looked up at her husband, at the raw emotion on his face. "You saved me, Colt, that day outside the store. You saved me." "No." He leaned forward to kiss her forehead, then the baby's. "You saved me, Nora. You gave me purpose, family, love, everything I'd spent my whole life looking for. I was the one who needed saving. Then we saved each other." Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat. "I'll go fetch that boy before he wears a hole in the yard pacing. He'll want to meet his sister." Eli burst through the door moments later, Scout at his heels. He approached the bed cautiously, eyes wide. "Is that her? Is that Hope? Come see." Nora shifted carefully to make room. "Come meet your sister." Eli climbed up beside her, staring at the baby with wonder. "She's so small. You were this small once. Really?" He looked doubtful, then reached out to touch Hope's hand with one finger. "Hi, Hope. I'm Eli. I'm your big brother. I'm going to teach you all kinds of stuff. How to fish and ride and track animals. Pa's going to teach me, and then I'll teach you." Hope made a small snuffling sound, and Eli's face lit up. "She likes me. Of course she likes you. You're her brother." Colt's arm came around Nora's shoulders, completing the circle. Her family. They sat together as night fell, the four of them in the warm cabin, and Nora felt peace settle over her like a blessing. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, about standing outside Garrett's store with empty hands and emptier hope, about Colt's quiet offer and her desperate courage in accepting, about the long, hard months of building something real from broken pieces. She thought about Tom and the hollow shell their marriage had been, about the years she'd spent believing she deserved nothing better, about the darkness that had almost swallowed her whole. And then she looked at Colt, at his scarred hands cradling their daughter with infinite tenderness, at his face transformed by love, and she understood that some stories had to break before they could heal. Some people had to fall all the way down before they could rise. "What are you thinking?" Colt asked softly. "That I spent so long being invisible, being nobody. And then you saw me." Her voice cracked. "That day outside the store when I had nothing and was nothing, you looked at me and saw someone worth helping, worth staying for. You were always worth it. Always." He kissed her temple. "I was just lucky enough to notice. We're both lucky." She looked down at Hope, already sleeping in the crook of her arm, then at Eli leaning against Colt's side. "We found each other when we needed it most. Built something good from hunger and shame and desperation." "Built Hope Creek," Eli said softly. "Built Hope Creek," Nora agreed. "A home for people who needed second chances, who needed to learn they were worth saving." Outside, snow fell soft and steady, blanketing the world in white. Inside, the fire crackled warmth through the cabin. The chickens were roosting safe in their coop. Daisy was settled in her stall. The garden lay dormant beneath the snow, waiting for spring's promise. And in the bed, they shared a family born from mercy and built on faith, held each other close, as their daughter Hope Mercer, named for new beginnings, slept her first sleep in the world. Colt had seen Nora when no one else would. He'd stayed when he could have left. He'd chosen love when fear would have been easier. And in doing so, he'd given her back not just survival, but life itself. They'd weathered poverty and judgment, gossip and doubt. They'd stood together against a world that wanted to tear them apart. And they'd won not by fighting, but by building, by choosing hope over fear, by believing that mercy freely given could transform everything. As Nora drifted toward sleep, exhausted and content, Colt's voice reached her through the warm darkness. "I love you, Nora Mercer, today and every day after." "I love you too," she whispered back. "My stranger, my savior, my home." And in the morning, when the sun rose over Hope Creek's valley, it would shine on a family that had survived the winter of their souls to find spring waiting on the other side, because one man had seen one woman's humanity, and both had found the courage to believe in second chances.